When I was 6 years old, my grandmother came to live with us, and she would make quilt blocks, and I was amazed at how she could cut small pieces of fabric and turn them into lovely blocks. She would always tell me the names of the blocks, and she told me that her grandmother, which would have been my great-great-grandmother, taught her how to make the quilts. So very patiently, grandmother taught my little 6-year-old fingers how to sew a seam. If it wasn't quite straight, she'd snip the thread and pull it out and say, try it again. So after a lot of practice, I soon learned to make a half-decent looking seam. She passed away when I was 10 years old, and so I missed having her around. But I did enjoy having learned a lot about quilting from her. My grandmother was born in 1856, and she told me a lot about her life as a child. And she especially told me about being so frightened when it was time when the Battle of Gettysburg occurred, because she was 7 years old at the time. Shortly after the battle was over, she, her grandmother, her mother, and a number of aunts and uncles gathered up all the quilts that they had and brought them here for the soldiers that were wounded and gave them to them. So the quilts that were before the time of 1856 were gone. I never saw any of those. So the only quilts that survived were a few from the late 1800s and early 1900s. I've made several quilts using patterns that grandmother taught me how to make. This one is a pinwheel quilt, a colonial pinwheel quilt. And usually they were made with 2 colors only, but I decided I like bright colors better than just 2, so I used all kinds of scraps. This one also looks like a pinwheel, but if you look at the block in the corner, you'll discover that it's not a pinwheel quilt, it's actually a pattern called broken dishes. When I make a quilt, I like to make samples of the block I'm going to use before I make the quilt. This one is made with 16 half-square triangles, and it's called Colorado. And this quilt that I made was a double bed size. It was only 2 colors, and it has an interesting story. When I finished it, my husband told me I should not put it on the bed because it was too loud. It would keep him awake all night. My little niece, who was visiting at the time, heard the story. And when she came for a sleepover, she told me she wanted to sleep under the noisy quilt. Well, after a time, she grew up and got married, and the quilt was still in pretty decent shape. So I gave it to her, and she told me recently she still has it, and her children slept under the noisy quilt. This is also a pattern that I'm working on currently to make a quilt. It's made with 16 half-square triangles, and this pattern is called Star of the Milky Way. I enjoy making quilts, and just like my grandmother and my great-grandmother, my objective is to give away all the quilts I make. So when I leave this earth, the quilts are all gone. I also brought my kitty cat along, and he's made with half-square triangles too. He's a good little kitty cat. He stays where I put him, and he doesn't need a litter box.